At first, no one thought it meant anything. It was a routine MRI scan, one of hundreds performed that week inside a European teaching hospital. The patient was unremarkable. No rare condition, no unusual symptoms. Just another image added to an ever-growing archive of brains rendered in grayscale. Then a technician paused. Not because the image was dramatic, but because something felt familiar. A subtle alignment. A shape that seemed out of place, yet oddly precise. It looked like noise, or artifact. The kind of thing radiology departments dismiss every day. Except this time, it appeared again. And again. Across patients who had nothing in common. Different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons for being scanned. The same pattern. And once it was seen, it could not be unseen. Magnetic resonance. Imaging is one of modern medicine's most trusted tools. It does not diagnose by intuition or interpretation alone. It produces data, raw, mathematical, repeatable. Patterns in MRI scans are the basis for diagnosing tumors, degenerative disease, trauma, and developmental disorders. Radiologists are trained to recognize variability. Human brains are not identical. Asymmetry is normal. Minor irregularities are expected. But repetition, especially precise repetition, is not. The hospital where this occurred was a major teaching institution, known for research rigor. MRI machines were regularly calibrated. Software updates were logged. Quality assurance protocols were strict. So when the same anomaly appeared in scans taken weeks apart, technicians did what protocol demanded. They blamed the machine. At first, the scanner was recalibrated. Phantom tests were run. Control scans showed nothing abnormal. The equipment checked out, but the pattern remained. The anomaly was subtle, not dramatic enough to alarm clinicians immediately. It did not correspond to known lesions or pathologies. It did not produce symptoms doctors could point to. What made it disturbing was its consistency. The pattern appeared in the same relative neural regions, not identical in size, but aligned, as if mapped against an internal reference no one had documented. Radiologists debated quietly. Some argued it was coincidence, a statistical fluke amplified by selective attention. Others suggested a processing artifact introduced by post-imaging software. But a problem emerged. The scans were processed using different software versions. Some were raw, some enhanced. The pattern survived every comparison. A small internal review was initiated. No press, no ethics committee, just a preliminary look to rule out error. And that's when the numbers stopped being comfortable. Across unrelated patients, the probability of this alignment occurring by chance was low. Not impossible, but low enough to warrant attention. And attention is dangerous in medicine when outcomes are unclear. The pattern did not indicate disease. It did not predict deterioration. It did not justify treatment, which meant it did not fit into any existing clinical category. In administrative language, it lacked clinical relevance. That phrase matters, because in hospitals, relevance determines whether something becomes a case study or a footnote. Still, curiosity persisted. A junior radiologist began quietly checking older scans, archived images from years earlier, different scanners, different countries. The pattern appeared there too, unnoticed, unflagged, unexplained. By now, the anomaly had crossed an invisible threshold. It was no longer a machine problem. It was no longer a coincidence. It was something that existed across time and geography, and had gone undetected because no one had been looking for it. A draft paper was written, careful in tone, conservative in claims. It did not speculate on cause. It did not imply pathology. It simply described the pattern, the recurrence, and the statistical improbability. And that was enough to trigger resistance. Senior radiologists questioned whether publishing would invite misinterpretation. Administrators worried about public perception. Ethics officers asked a simple but chilling question. What do we do with this information if we can't act on it? The paper stalled. Then, access to the raw imaging data changed. Not deleted, restricted. Officially, the restriction was procedural, patient privacy, data governance, cross-border compliance, all legitimate concerns. But internally, the effect was unmistakable. The scans could no longer be freely reanalyzed. External collaboration slowed. The draft paper was shelved. No memo declared the pattern false. No review disproved it. It was simply set aside. Yet the unease remained, because patterns that survive scrutiny do not disappear when ignored. They wait, and this is where the story widens. Because years later, when researchers in other countries independently reviewed old MRI archives for unrelated studies, they noticed something strange, something that echoed the same alignment, the same quiet geometry. They didn't know about the European hospital. They didn't know about the unpublished paper. They didn't know they were rediscovering the same unresolved question, which brings us to the most unsettling realization of all. If this pattern exists across populations, across time, and across imaging systems, how long has it been there? And why did medicine decide it was safer not to ask what it means? In the next part, we'll follow the anomaly beyond a single hospital and examine why a discovery that doesn't fit our definition of normal can become the most difficult thing to confront. The most unsettling discoveries in medicine are rarely dramatic. They don't announce themselves with alarms or obvious symptoms. They emerge quietly, through repetition, alignment, and statistics that refuse to behave the way they should. By the time the European hospital restricted access to its MRI files, the anomaly was no longer confined to one building, one scanner, or one research group. It had already escaped into the past. Medical imaging archives are vast, fragmented, and largely dormant. Millions of scans sit untouched after their initial clinical purpose is fulfilled. They are preserved for legal compliance, teaching, or the faint possibility that one day someone might look again. Most never are. But when researchers in other countries began digitizing older MRI archives for unrelated projects, machine learning calibration, longitudinal aging studies, imaging software validation, they stumbled onto something familiar. A faint alignment. A recurring spatial relationship between neural regions that didn't correspond to anatomy as taught in textbooks. At first, it was dismissed the same way it had been before. Noise, artifact, coincidence. Until it wasn't. What made the rediscovery unsettling was not the clarity of the pattern, but its restraint. It did not dominate the scans. It did not distort anatomy. It did not announce pathology. It sat just below the threshold of clinical significance. That threshold exists for a reason. Medicine is trained to act on dysfunction, to identify what breaks, deteriorates, or threatens life. Features that appear stable, silent, and asymptomatic are rarely pursued. This pattern did not harm, it persisted, and persistence without consequence is often ignored. But statisticians involved in secondary analyses noticed something troubling. When scans were normalized, adjusted for age, sex, scanner type, the pattern's relative position held. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to defy chance. This was not a single structure, it was a relationship. And relationships are harder to explain away. The human brain is not random, but neither is it perfectly ordered. Variation is expected. Plasticity is central. Development, experience, and environment reshape neural architecture throughout life, which is why repeating internal alignment across unrelated individuals raises red flags. If the pattern were genetic, it would cluster within families or populations. It didn't. If it were environmental, geography or exposure history would matter. It didn't. If it were pathological, symptoms would correlate. They didn't. What remained was a possibility medicine is deeply uncomfortable with: that there may be structural regularities in the human brain that are not pathological, not adaptive, and not yet conceptualized. In other words, normal but unrecognized. When researchers attempted to compare notes across institutions, they encountered resistance, not overt, but procedural. Data sharing agreements stalled. Ethics reviews expanded in scope. Requests for raw imaging were delayed or denied. Again, all defensible on paper, but the cumulative effect was isolation. Each group saw only fragments. No one was positioned to assemble the whole picture. And that fragmentation mattered, because patterns that span populations require synthesis. They require collaboration. They require someone willing to say, "This exists, even if we don't understand it." That sentence is harder to publish than it sounds. Scientific journals demand more than observation. They demand interpretation. What does this mean? What causes it? Why does it matter? In this case, the most honest answer was, we don't know. And we don't know is acceptable only when accompanied by a clear path to knowing more. Here, that path was uncertain. If the pattern represented a fundamental organizational principle of the brain, it would challenge assumptions embedded in decades of neuroscience. If it represented a developmental constraint, it would force reconsideration of how individuality is defined neurologically. If it represented neither, if it was something emergent, statistical, or currently indescribable, it would expose the limits of existing frameworks. None of those outcomes are comfortable. All of them are destabilizing. So the safest option was silence. Silence does not erase data, it delays reckoning. The pattern remained in scans. It appeared in training data sets. It influenced algorithms subtly, invisibly. Machine learning models trained on MRI data began to internalize correlations no human had named. When engineers attempted to interpret why certain features improved prediction accuracy, explanations were vague. The models picked up structure. No one could quite say what kind. The anomaly was no longer just a human observation. It had become a mathematical one. And mathematics does not forget. At this point, the story takes a sharper turn. Because once algorithms began detecting the pattern without being told to look for it, the question changed. It was no longer, "Is this real?" It became, "Why does our definition of normal exclude something that appears so consistently?" In the next part, we'll examine the most difficult implication of all: what this pattern suggests about the way medicine categorizes brains, diagnoses difference, and decides which variations are worth naming. Because the most unsettling possibility isn't that the brain hides a secret. It's that it has been showing it to us all along, and we didn't have a place to put it. Medicine depends on categories: normal and abnormal, healthy and diseased, variation and pathology. Every diagnosis, every treatment plan, every clinical guideline rests on the assumption that these boundaries are stable. The MRI pattern threatened that stability, not by announcing a new disease, but by quietly existing where no category applied. And that made it far more dangerous than an illness. To understand why the pattern became such a problem, we need to understand how medicine defines normal. In neuroscience, normality is statistical. Large populations are scanned, measured, averaged. Deviations from those averages, when correlated with symptoms, become diagnoses. This system works remarkably well for identifying dysfunction. But it has a blind spot. It is not designed to recognize structures or relationships that are consistent, non-pathological, clinically silent. If something does not cause harm, does not impair function, and does not demand treatment, medicine has no incentive to name it. The MRI pattern sat precisely in that blind spot. It did not predict disease. It did not explain behavior. It did not correlate with outcomes doctors cared about, which meant it was invisible. Not because it was rare, but because it was irrelevant to existing goals. As more researchers encountered the pattern independently, a quiet shift occurred. The question was no longer whether the pattern existed, it was whether acknowledging it would change anything. And that question split opinions sharply. Some argued that recognizing undocumented regularities could deepen understanding of brain organization. Others warned that naming a pattern without functional interpretation could lead to misuse, overdiagnosis, pseudoscience, or public misunderstanding. Administrators worried about a different risk entirely. If the brain contains consistent structures we don't understand, what does that say about current diagnostic confidence? Medical authority depends on the perception of mastery, on the idea that unknowns are shrinking, not expanding. This pattern suggested the opposite. Not a gap in data, but a gap in framework. There was also an ethical problem no one wanted to confront directly. If a recurring neural pattern exists across healthy individuals and we don't know what it does, or whether it does anything at all, what responsibility does medicine have to disclose it? Telling patients, "We see this, but it means nothing," risks confusion. Not telling them risks paternalism. But there is a deeper discomfort beneath both options. If medicine admits it cannot explain something fundamental about the brain, it undermines the implicit contract between doctor and patient. We understand enough to guide you. So the system defaulted to omission. Not out of malice, out of caution. Silence has consequences. When something is unnamed, it cannot be studied systematically. It cannot be funded easily. It cannot be taught. Over time, it effectively does not exist. But the MRI pattern refused to disappear. It influenced statistical baselines. It subtly affected how average brains were defined. It was baked into reference datasets without being recognized as a feature, which means every model built on those datasets inherited it, unexamined. In other words, medicine unknowingly adapted around something it never acknowledged. That is not ignorance. That is accommodation without understanding. At several points, researchers proposed reopening the question. Not dramatically, not publicly, just to name the pattern, to describe it neutrally, to say, this exists, and we don't yet know why. Each time, the same obstacles appeared. Review boards asked for clinical relevance. Funding agencies asked for outcomes. Journals asked for interpretation. No one asked whether the pattern was real anymore. They asked what it would do. And because the honest answer remained, "We don't know," the proposals stalled. In medicine, uncertainty without urgency is easy to defer. There is an unspoken fear underlying all of this. If the pattern represents a fundamental organizational principle of the human brain, one that does not map neatly onto cognition, behavior, or disease, then our understanding of individuality may be incomplete. It suggests that beneath personal experience, genetics, and environment, there may be deeper regularities shaping us in ways we have not conceptualized. Not controllable, not diagnostic, just there. Medicine is not philosophically equipped for that possibility. It is trained to fix, not to contemplate. By now, the pattern has crossed a critical threshold. It is not a fluke. It is not local. It is not explained. And yet, it remains officially non-existent. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable implication of all. What if this pattern is not an anomaly at all, but evidence of a limitation in how medicine defines normality? In the next part, we will confront what happens when technology, especially machine learning, begins to recognize structures that human frameworks have no language for. Because when machines see what we don't name, the problem is no longer whether the pattern exists. It's whether we are prepared to acknowledge what that says about us. When machines began noticing the pattern, the silence became impossible to justify. Because unlike humans, algorithms don't care about clinical relevance, professional comfort, or conceptual elegance. They detect structure wherever structure exists. And once they did, the question was no longer whether the anomaly belonged in medicine. It was whether medicine could afford to ignore what its own tools were learning without permission. In the 2010s, MRI data became a training ground for machine learning. Hospitals and research institutions fed millions of scans into algorithms designed to identify tumors earlier, predict neurodegenerative disease, and flag subtle markers invisible to the human eye. The goal was efficiency, precision, objectivity. But machine learning systems don't simply replicate human judgment. They find correlations, even when no one asks them to. During performance audits, engineers noticed something peculiar. Certain models performed better than expected, even when obvious pathological markers were removed. Accuracy held. Sometimes it improved. When developers attempted to explain why, the answers were vague. The models had learned internal structure, not disease. Structure. At first, this was celebrated. Proof that artificial intelligence could see what humans missed. But when engineers attempted to isolate which features the models were using, they encountered a familiar discomfort. The highlighted regions overlapped with the same areas implicated in the earlier, unacknowledged MRI pattern. Not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency mattered. The algorithms weren't detecting illness. They were detecting regularity, an internal alignment present across large portions of the population. No one had told the models this alignment was important. They discovered it independently, which forced a quiet, unsettling realization. The pattern was not just real. It was statistically useful. In medicine, usefulness without understanding is a liability. Black box models can predict outcomes, but doctors are expected to explain why. Regulatory bodies demand transparency. Patients demand justification. So when machine learning systems began relying on features no one could name, teams faced a dilemma. They could remove those features, reducing performance but preserving interpretability. Or keep them, accepting that something essential was being used without explanation. Most chose the first option. Performance was sacrificed. The pattern was suppressed again, not because it was wrong, but because it was unintelligible. This is where the story turns critical, because suppression at the algorithmic level doesn't erase reality. It only delays reckoning. Machines do not invent anatomy. They infer structure from data. If multiple independent models converge on similar internal alignments, it suggests the brain contains organizing principles that are consistent, measurable, and currently unnamed. That does not imply purpose. It does not imply dysfunction. It implies incompleteness. Our frameworks for understanding the brain, built around disease, cognition, and behavior, may be missing layers that operate beneath conscious experience, layers that matter statistically but not clinically. And that distinction is deeply uncomfortable. Medicine prides itself on progress, on the idea that unknowns shrink with time. This pattern suggests a different reality. Not that we know less, but that our definitions of knowledge are narrow. If a feature exists, persists, and influences models, but produces no symptoms and no clear function, does it count as knowledge? Or is it noise we choose to ignore? Historically, medicine has struggled with this question. Many now fundamental discoveries began as inconvenient observations, things that didn't fit prevailing theories. But those discoveries eventually connected to function. This one hasn't. And that may be the problem. Several interdisciplinary teams proposed a modest step. Formal description without interpretation. Just documentation. Just acknowledgement. But even that proved difficult. Once something is named, it demands explanation. It invites speculation. It risks misinterpretation by media, pseudoscience, or commercial misuse. Administrators feared headlines that would imply hidden brain structures or secret neurological codes, not because those claims were true, but because nuance rarely survives attention. So, the safest path remained silence. Again, here is the paradox at the center of this story. Medicine relies increasingly on tools that detect patterns beyond human perception. Yet it resists acknowledging patterns it cannot immediately explain. That tension is sustainable only temporarily. Because machines will continue to learn. They will continue to exploit structure, whether or not we understand it. And eventually, their predictions will force explanations, either by outperforming human judgment too consistently to ignore, or by failing in ways that demand accountability. At that point, silence will no longer be an option. So we arrive at the final threshold. The MRI pattern exists across populations. It persists across time. It is detected independently by machines. It resists existing categories. And it remains officially unnamed, which leads to the most difficult question of all. What happens when medicine is forced to confront a form of normality that does not align with its definitions and cannot be dismissed as error? In the final part, we'll step back and confront what this story ultimately reveals. Not about a hidden pattern in the brain, but about the limits of certainty in modern medicine, and why some truths remain uncomfortable not because they are dangerous, but because they are incomplete. Every scientific mystery eventually reaches a point where the question is no longer what was found, but why we reacted the way we did. By now, the MRI pattern is no longer the most important part of this story. What matters is what its existence quietly exposes about modern medicine. How knowledge is defined, how uncertainty is managed, and how some truths remain unspoken not because they are false, but because they are unfinished. Let's be precise about what this story does not claim. There is no hidden disease. There is no suppressed diagnosis. There is no secret neurological code waiting to be decoded. What exists is far more subtle and far more challenging. A recurring structural relationship within the human brain, observed across unrelated individuals, detected across time, and independently rediscovered by both humans and machines. It does not cause harm, it does not predict illness, it does not explain behavior, it simply exists. And that is exactly why it became so difficult to confront. Medicine is built around intervention, around problems that demand action. Cancer must be treated. Degeneration must be slowed. Abnormalities must be classified. But what happens when something is consistent, silent, statistically real, and clinically inert? There is no protocol for that. The MRI pattern doesn't ask for treatment. It doesn't warn of danger. It doesn't justify screening or prevention. It offers no leverage, which means acknowledging it would require medicine to accept a form of knowledge without utility. And modern systems struggle with that idea. The uncomfortable truth is this: medicine does not study the brain as it is. It studies the brain as it fails. Most of neuroscience is organized around breakdown. Damage, loss, dysfunction, deviation. Healthy brains are often treated as a baseline, not a subject. The pattern disrupts that logic. It suggests that there may be stable organizing principles in the brain that do not announce themselves through function or dysfunction. They are not adaptive traits. They are not pathologies. They are not signals of identity. They are structural regularities. And medicine lacks a conceptual home for them. So, the silence was not malicious. It was protective. Protective of clarity, protective of authority, protective of a system that relies on the idea that unexplained phenomena are shrinking, not accumulating. Admitting, we see this, but we don't know what it means, is honest, but destabilizing. It invites philosophical questions medicine is not designed to answer. What is normal if it includes things we cannot interpret? What is knowledge if it offers no action? What is certainty if even healthy brains contain unresolved structure? These are not medical questions. They are epistemological ones, and this may be the most important takeaway of all. The pattern was not locked away because it was dangerous. It was set aside because it revealed a boundary between what medicine can describe and what it can meaningfully explain. The brain did not change. Our expectations did. We assumed that with enough data, enough imaging, enough computation, every regularity would eventually map to purpose. This pattern challenges that assumption. It suggests that some structures may simply be there, without narrative, without diagnosis, without function we currently recognize. That doesn't make them meaningless. It makes our frameworks incomplete. Today, the pattern remains where it has always been, in the data, in the averages, in the training sets. It subtly shapes models, influences baselines, and persists without acknowledgement. It is neither denied nor accepted, just waiting. Perhaps one day a new framework will emerge, one that studies the brain not only as a machine that breaks, but as a system that contains regularities beyond utility. Or perhaps the pattern will remain unnamed, absorbed so completely into normal that it no longer feels strange. History suggests both outcomes are possible. This story does not end with a revelation. It ends with a recognition that even in one of the most scrutinized organs in human history, there are features we see clearly, but do not yet understand. And sometimes, the most unsettling discovery is not a hidden abnormality, but a reminder that normal itself may be larger, quieter, and less explained than we are comfortable admitting.